Good morning and good evening, everyone. So we will start with the usual opening recitations. Jebe nobar jebe ge tarba dan tamje gembe bardu jobra jeba tam jege su jebe manangkada nyampe senjen tamje dewa dan den tungyao dan de nudu lana me pa yang da para zobe chanju rinpoche to para jo nala tawa jebe dra no par jebe ge tarba dan tam je gembe bardu jobra jeba tam je ge su jebe manang kadang nyampe senjen tam je dewa dan den dungyao dan de nudu lana me pa yang Dabra zobe chanchu rinpoche topra ja nala thangwa jebe dra nopar jebe ge tarba dan tamje kembe bardu jobra jeba tamje ge su jebe manam kadang nyampe senchen tamje dewa dan ten dungyao dan de nerdu lana me bhaya Dabra Zobe Chanchu Rinpoche Tobra Deje De Sangma Geki Bardu Lunga Yisum Gewala Ko Mashi Bardu Lunga Yisum Gewala Ko De Dring Ne Songte Nema Santa Samji Bardu Lunga Yisum Gewala Ko Sanje Chodan Soke Chonam La Chanchu Bardu Dane Kyabse Che Dage Jinse Gibe Zonang Ke Drola Penche Sanje Drupra Shu Sanje Chodan Soke Chonam La Chanchu Bardu Dane Kyabse Che Dage Jinse Gibe Zonang Ke Drola Penche Sanje Drupra Shu Sanje Chodan Soke Chonam La Chanchu Bardu Dane Kyabsu Chi Dhage Junsu Kibe Sonam Ki Rola Penche Sanje Drupra Shu Monang Kodam Nyampe Senchen Tomche Dewa Da Dewe Gildan Debra Gyurji Dungyal Dang Dungyal Ki Gyudan Trewa Gyurji Dungyal Mepe Dewa Dhangme Trewa Gyurji Nering Chodang Nidang Trewa Tang Nyong La Nebra Kyu Chi Ma Nang Ka Dang Nyam Pe Sen Chen Tam Che Dewa Dang Dewe Gyun Dan Tempra Kyu Chi Dung Yao Dang Dung Yao Ki Kyu Dang Dewa Kyu Chi Dung Yao Me Pe Dewa Dang Me Dewa Kyu Chi Ne Ring Cha Dang Ni Dang Dewa Tang Nyong La Nebra Kyu Chi Ma Nang Ka Dang Nyam Pe Sen Chen Tam Che Dewa Dang Dewe Gindan Dempra Gyurji, Dungyao Dang Dungyao Ki Gyudang Drawa Gyurji, Dungyao Mepe Dewa Dhami Drawa Gyurji, Niding Chadang Nidang Drawa, Tangyong La Nebra Gyurji. In all the worlds of the 10 directions reside Tathagatas of the 3 times. Before each of you, lions among humans, I prostrate joyfully with body, speech, and mind. And by the power of this aspiration to noble deeds, all conquerors appear vividly in my mind, with as many bodies as there are atoms. In all lands I prostrate to all you conquerors. In each atom a Buddha's numerous as atoms, all in the midst of the heirs of the Buddhas. Thus I conceive of this Dharma Dhatu as completely filled with you conquerors in this way. With infinite oceans of praise and oceans of diverse melodies, I sing the excellent qualities of you conquerors, and praise all of you gone to bliss with the best flowers and best garlands, best music, ointments, and excellent parasols, finest lamps and superior incense. I offer to you conquerors with excellent garments and best fragrances and sandalwood powder, heaped high as Mount Meru, all wondrous offerings perfectly arranged. I offer to you conquerors these vast and unequal offerings to each and every one of you conquerors. With the power of conviction and noble deeds, I prostrate and offer to all you conquerors all the harmful deeds that I have done with my body, speech, and mind. Under the power of desire, hatred, and ignorance, I confess each and every one of them. I rejoice in all the meritorious deeds of all conquerors in the 10 directions and the heirs of the Buddhas, solitary realizers, hearers still in training and beyond, and all wandering beings. You who are lambs of the worlds of the 10 directions, who have unobstructedly attained Buddhahood through the stages of Bodhi, all you who are my protectors, please turn the unexhaled wheel of Dharma. With palms together, I earnestly beseech you who may intend to manifest final nirvana. Please remain for as many eons as there are atoms in the world for the happiness and well-being of all wandering beings. Whatever slight virtue that may have been gathered through prostrating, offering, confessing, rejoicing, requesting, and beseeching are now dedicated to complete Bodhi. So ju bugi ju shi me tu tam ri ra lin chi nin de ge pa de san je shin tu ming te pu wa ye zhou gu nam da xing la ge wa shu gu su yong zo la me co nam la qi nang sang sun de shi ni ge ju da lu long zhou nang si yong xie la me ju ge我的ψ du su zhao se wa dang ju jing shao pa dang ji se yi rang ku xing so wa yi ge wa chung se da ge ji sa ba tam je so be chang ju je ngo guru deva da ge ni re na men da la prati ja so ha san je nam ki sambada lo yi ji da wa je chung tu mon te ba yi choki kolo korodu zo je chanchen de le naro dama mi da bo pa de je den kong ka den sun den za we la me sha sa je la ma yi dam chok yong la so ba de so da ge chen je lo mo je ye je na chang sa pe ma ge sa dong bo la ya sen chok yong ma de mi pe ma je ne je je dong go dong ka de ma bo go ye ge je se da do ge chen je la je she so so go ro pe ma se de ho ge bra ge do me sam len ge da pe do sun yong la ke cho me ge wa do je chang pa ji den kum ba sha la do do ta do sang ge ge le me chen je lo she thu je je ne ge ma pa sha ne ge san do de do do bra je je lo o me ju ye ge bo da ne这是三界恭敬我问你南山中公公孙同这个拉萨为拉美小老说嘛。I briefly talked about the reasons and rationales with regards to chanting as a practice, chanting the different languages and all of that. One thing that I also want to mention, in more recent research that has been done on breath, scientific research that has been done on breath. So they say that what they have discovered that there is that different, like our two basic nervous systems, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems, that our breath intake and outflow is related to the two basic nervous systems. So the sympathetic nervous system is the one that gets us to fight or flight. When you recognize situations, conditions that are dangerous, you either fight or flight, run. But this is the nervous system, right? So we're not literally saying you either get up to fight or you run. Your internal stuff, your mental state, your blood pressure, your immune system, all of that. So that's one. Yeah. The parasympathetic is the one that is, to rest, yeah, relax, and reproduce, yeah, so to say. So now relating it to breath, when we are inhaling, then the sympathetic nervous system is sort of made active. And when we exhale, the parasympathetic is activated. Now, both these are important. Both these are necessary. That both the nervous systems and breathing, obviously, inhalation, exhalation. You cannot have one and not have the other. So they are both important. But the thing is, our lives these days tend to overactivate the sympathetic nervous system, so that we are always activated in that sense. We are always like on guard. We are always indignant. We are always, upset. We are always worried. We are always. So right now, the way most of us live our lives, the sympathetic nervous system is going overtime, double time, triple time. So for those of you who need an extra nudge to give chanting practice a chance, I want to offer you that actually chanting is another way to reduce the flaring up of your sympathetic nervous system and to develop and to give yourself more opportunity for the parasympathetic nervous system. So the other benefits of chanting, you should not forget. In this instance, you notice how when you are chanting, and chanting necessarily means out loud, right? It doesn't, how loud doesn't matter, but vocalizing. when you're chanting, your in-breath is short and fast. Your out-breath is long and slow. So to demonstrate, okay, I'm going to use, when I'm doing my in-breath, I'm going to go like this, okay? And as I'm exhaling, I'm going to do like this, okay? Right? Yeah, the opening aspiration bodhicitta is what I will demonstrate with. Dala Dhamma Jebe Dra Nobar Jebe Ge Tarba Dham Thamje Kempe Bardu Chopra Jeba Tham Chegi Su Jebe Ma Nangka Dang Nyampe Senchen Thamje Dewa Dham Ten Dungyao Dangre Nudu Lana Me Paya Dabara Zobe Chanju Rinpoche Tobra Ja Dala Dhamma Jebe Dra Nobar Jebe Ge Tarba Dham Thamje Kempe Bardu Chopra Jeba Tham Chegi Su Jebe Ma Nangka Dang Nyampe Senchen Thamje Dewa Dham Ten Dungyao Dangre Nudu Lana Me Paya Dabra Zobe Chanju Rinpoche Tobra Jo. See that? Down, you know. So you spending more time, you know, with the parasympathetic nervous system. And so then your blood pressure goes down, 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 down. Then you are reflecting on the meaning of bodhicitta. Your heart is open, you know. So it's not just one thing. It's all these elements when you come together. Then there is the blessing of the energy, the blessing of so many generations of great beings have said this. Yeah, so all these elements coming together support the kind of practice that we're aiming to do. So the more we kind of see and know how to utilize these methods, then the more we can really derive benefit from them. Yeah, so now let's come back to Bodhicharyavatara. Yeah. So we are now in chapter 6, the chapter on patience. We have already covered basically the first 10 verses of chapter 6. Particularly last time we paid attention to the relationship between verses 7, 8 and verses 9, 10. I said, I discovered in having looked at Bodhicharyavatara so many times, this is second time I think I would say that I'm teaching from cover to cover. Well, as long as King Yama doesn't have other plans, I plan to finish teaching this time. Last time, many years ago, I did that. And then, of course, in between, different chapters, different parts, and then my own, reading as much as I can. But I've recently discovered how 7 and 8 is really talking about the cause side of things. 9 and 10 is talking about the effect side of things. And then often between 7 and 8 and 9 and 10, 9 and 10 is often quoted in many Buddhist texts, in many teachings. I myself have, kind of posted, especially verse 9, or shared this with others, which is the one that a more popular translation, maybe a stretch of what the Sanskrit actually says, but, works reasonably well, which is, if a problem can be solved, why worry? If it cannot be solved, no amount of worrying can solve it. Then 10 is the one that says, basically it says, why get discouraged? Why get, upset? Why get sad? Because there's no need for this. So what I shared last class is like, really 9 and 10 is talking about the effect, the result. If we really want the result, we have to cultivate the causes, which is 7 and 8. So without cultivating the causes in 7 and 8, understanding where dukkha comes from, the nature of dukkha, of suffering, of dissatisfaction. And in this case, the dukkha that comes from anger, the dukkha that comes from lack of patience. So without understanding that, and without then working on getting rid of those causes, the effect that is described in 9 and 10 is very hard to reach. So discontent or frustration is the fuel that feeds the enemy anger. This content or frustration comes from our desire unfulfilled, comes from there being a gap between me and what I desire. So if we do not want the enemy, anger, to grow stronger and stronger by the day, then we should not feed this enemy. We feed this enemy when we let desire go rampant. Firstly. Secondly, even if we try to restrain desire, if we don't understand what is it about desire that turns into frustration, then if we just blindly try to control desire, that will also lead to discontent. So skillful release or skillful letting go is something that we need to develop. So when we can practice what is taught in verses 7 and 8, then the result of 9 and 10 can come. Telling ourselves and telling others not to worry doesn't stop worrying. Telling ourselves or telling others that, oh, there's no point worrying, doesn't stop worrying. In fact, it can even backfire. So if we tell ourselves, no point worrying, stop worrying, then a certain level of judgment is there, meaning we are, we risk, oh, you're not good enough. So then it will feed that other destructive poison, which is to denigrate yourself. A healthy sense of self is very important in this path that helps us to see beyond the illusion of self. Nonetheless, a healthy sense of self is where we need to start from. Then lacking skill, if we try to tell others, oh, don't worry, there's no point worrying. This problem, if it can be solved, worrying will not, worrying is pointless. Especially if the people, if you don't have skill to say it, and I'm not saying that it's never appropriate. I'm saying just understand, like if you don't say it in the right moment and the person is receptive, then it can, again, then in this case, if you say it to someone else, they will think, what are you? You think you're a saint? I remember last week when you were worrying. People will, then it just becomes kind of not very useful. So actually, now I know, I recognize more when I look at these 4 verses. Oh, 7 and 8 is where we should mostly be working on. Then 9 and 10 can come more naturally. When you begin to see more and more, Kyopa Jigten Sungyen's emphasis on that cause and effect is the teachings on cause and effect is the real indicator of the profound wisdom of Buddhists. When you begin to really appreciate that, then you begin to see more and more how this principle turns up everywhere. And using this as a way to read and assimilate the Buddha's teachings, using this principle of understanding that cause and effect is the true profound wisdom of Buddhists. The teachings on cause and effect. When we begin to have that more and more as the way that we look at all these teachings, you will draw out things that you have never seen before. So now let's read together verses 11 to 21 in the different languages. Pain, humiliation, insults, or rebukes, we do not want them, either for ourselves or those we love. For those we do not like, it is the reverse. The cause of happiness is rare, and many are the seeds of suffering. But if I have no pain, I'll never long for freedom. Therefore, O my mind, be steadfast. The Karna folk and those devoted to the goddess endure the meaningless austerities of being cut and burned. So why am I so timid on the path of freedom? There's nothing that does not grow light through habit and familiarity. Putting up with little cares, I'll train myself to bear with great adversity. Don't I see that this is so with common irritations, bites and stings of snakes and flies, experiences of hunger and of thirst, and painful rashes on my skin? Heat and cold, the wind and rain, sickness, prison, beatings,
I'll not fret about such things. To do so only aggravates my trouble. There are some whose bravery increases at the sight of their own blood, while some lose all their strength and faint when it is another's blood they see. This results from how the mind is set in steadfastness or cowardice. So I'll scorn all injury and hardships I will disregard. When sorrows fall upon the wise, their minds should be serene and undisturbed. For in their war against defiled emotion, many are the hardships, as in every battle. Thinking scorn of every pain and vanquishing such foes as hatred, these are exploits of victorious warriors. The rest is slaying what is dead already. Suffering also has its worth. Through sorrow, pride is driven out, and pity felt for those who wander in samsara. Evil is avoided, goodness seems delightful. So in verse 11, according to Khenpo Kunpel, he says why, towards what do we get angry? Do we get annoyed? So remember, okay, this word anger here, just like the word patience, which last class I used the Sanskrit kashanti, or in Pali kanti. Kashanti carries a range of meanings beyond what our English word patience, and I suspect Spanish and Chinese ordinarily includes. It's a broader range, as I explained in last class. Likewise, the word anger also covers a broader range. It's not just the loud anger that we all recognize as anger. Perhaps even more important, how this kashanti is able to overcome the problem of anger is the quiet kind of anger, the one that leads to being dejected, being negative, being sad, annoyed, all those. It's basically a rejection of life. Not renunciation, that we can talk about later. Yeah, this is really kind of leads to like giving up. So this is the thirst for non-existence, the thirst or the craving for non-existence. And the three types of craving. In my Open Sangha class recently, we were talking about craving. A craving for sensory experiences, craving for existence, and craving for non-existence. So this anger is related to craving for non-existence. So here in verse 11, so like what are the occasions in which this anger arises? So that is being identified in verse 11. So in the translation that I have, there are four things identified: pain, humiliation, insults, and rebukes. So in the translation that I have, it's these four words. I don't know the Spanish and the Chinese, what you have, but here it says pain, humiliation, insults, and rebukes. So these four, they say, Shantideva says, first, we don't want these four things for ourselves. Secondarily, we don't want these four things for those whom we love, we care about. And then thirdly, we wish these four upon those we don't like. Now, however, these four things that Shantideva identifies as translated, Khenpo Kumpel elaborates on what they are. So the first one, pain, basically talking about more in the sense of like physical pain, physical inconveniences, that kind of pain, that kind of suffering. That's the first one. The second one is talking about, again, regardless of how the translation you're reading is translating it. The second thing that we don't want, he says, is people, discriminating against us with contempt. That then causes disadvantages to us. People treating us unfairly in a negative way. Third is, he explains as direct verbal aggression. People accusing you, calling you a thief, calling you, useless, direct verbal aggression. And the fourth, he says, people maliciously, gossiping against you, spreading false rumors about you. So these four, he says, we don't want for ourselves, we don't want for those we care about, and we want them for our enemies. So he says, it is on these occasions that we have to exercise Kshanti, which is when we get any of these four, when those we love and care for get any of these four, and when our enemies don't get these four, that's when we should practice Kshanti. Like when our enemies, they're getting like happier by the day. At least what you see, as they're getting happier by the day, they're getting more successful by the day. They're getting more followers on Twitter. It says during that time you should practice Kshanti. Verses 12 to 21, Shantideva tells us that we need to accept suffering, accept dukkha. Skillfully accepting dukkha. Not blindly enduring dukkha. First of all, to whatever degree we can, we should avoid creating dukkha. Don't create the causes. That is, the main practice. But then, no matter how much, right, we right now say, okay, I'm going to stop, do my best to stop creating dukkha. Dukkha is still going to turn up. And Buddha taught why? Because our past is infinite and we have created so many causes, so planted so many seeds, and so that those seeds are now ripening. And so here Shantideva is talking about those seeds that are now ripening, that we cannot halt them from ripening in time. When they ripen, we have to learn how to skillfully accept the dukkha that is arising now. So this is 12 to 21. He offers different reasons, different ways of looking at, dukkha when it has turned up. So the first two lines of verse 12, in my translation, it says, the cause of happiness is rare and many are the seeds of suffering. Personally, I don't know if you need to take these two statements literally. I sometimes fear that if you take these two lines literally, you will end up with a very negative view about life. Again, negative in the unskillful way. when you view this world, this life negatively in an unskillful way, it doesn't lead to renunciation. It leads to a very dark place. But when you're able to see what's negative about this confused existence in a skillful way, then it's very helpful. It will cause renunciation. So I think it's enough at the start, at least, to look at these first two lines as this is often how we feel when things don't go our way, right? These two lines almost is the way we feel like, oh, why is it? Happiness is so hard to get. Suffering is everywhere. Not last week when you were eating donuts. Yeah, so these two lines is sufficient to think that, Shantideva is just expressing something that we all, feel, especially when things don't go our way. So he's not necessarily doing an assessment report and writing an inventory for samsara, Although certainly in many commentaries, they do take this statement literally. And this, as I said, it's fine, but be careful, okay? Don't take these two lines and make your world a darker place. When the Dharma that the Buddha gave us, we foolishly turn into poison, then there's very little hope left. So here is saying, I can say these first two lines is saying, when you feel like, when you like quite naturally, without the help of Dharma, you feel like, oh, this is just miserable. I cannot stand this. I don't want this. At that time, he says, now you think, but if I have no pain, I'll never long for freedom. This is the third line. So it's saying, especially as Dharma practitioners, when things go wrong, we tend to think, especially people who practice Tibetan Buddhism. Why? Because there's so many things about removing obstacles. So when things go wrong, we immediately think, oh, what can I do to remove obstacles? What drums can I bang? What cymbals can I, clash? And who can I send money to solve my problems? spiritual materialism, as Trungpa Rinpoche calls it. And we become addicted to. So this is wrong for you. Instead, as Dharma practitioners, when things go wrong, it doesn't matter what areas, but when things go wrong, when suffering turns up, what we should do with that suffering is to bring into focus the faults of samsara and say, I really need to jailbreak. I really need to free myself from this prison. I was reading a biography of a senior Western monk in the Thai forest tradition, the biography of Ajahn Munindo, who is the translator of whose translation of the Dhammapada I really like. So I was recently reading his biography. He's more than 70 years old now. I think he became a monk in 1976. So he was saying, he was sharing how at one point in their monastery in Thailand, which is the International Forest Monastery, which is built within walking distance from the main monastery, where their teacher started their community. Lompo Cha, Ajahn Cha, known in the West as Ajahn Cha, have their original community. Then within walking distance is the International Forest Monastery that the Western disciples with support from local people have built. So at a certain point, that community, the Western international community, was doing really well. Everyone felt, that they are together and things are going smoothly, everything is going nicely. So he related how they were so happy to report to their teacher, Lompo Cha, that, it's really good what we have over there. To which, Lompo Cha said, yes, that is good, but it also probably means there will be no real growth going on. So this Ajahn Munindo said, Longpocha often, usually in the early days, many seekers will come through and, they're very interested in like, do you teach like calm abiding, or do you teach, shamatha, calm abiding method, or do you teach vipassana, special insight method, or do you teach, mindfulness, anapanasati, mindfulness of breath? They're all very technique oriented. What do you teach? What do you teach? And Ajahn Munindo says, Longpocha will, when usually he will try to not answer those kinds of questions, but from time to time when he would answer, he would say, my system is the system of frustration. He says, that's my technique, frustration. Neither Longpocha or Shantideva is encouraging you to go manufacture more frustration and more dukkha, but rather when dukkha arises, don't push it away. That right there is the opportunity to grow. So the fourth line of verse 12, it says, therefore, O my mind, O my heart, be steadfast, be firm. So if you're brave, you can use this mantra to help you face dukkha. And the mantra is, and I will share with you. There are three parts to this mantra. If not now, when? First part. If not me, then who? If not here, then where? So when dukkha arises, that's the mantra that we can use to overcome this obstacle. Right? If not now, when? If not me, whom? If not here, then where? So now Shantideva is asking his audience. He's making references that his audience would understand easily. So he says, the Karana folk and those devoted to the goddess endure the meaningless austerities of being cut and burned. And so here he's referring to, in his own time, there are those who adopt spiritual religious practices whereby they even impale themselves on weapons as self-sacrifice to please some goddess. And the Karna folk, I think some say that they are like devoted to a god, where it's also they believe that if they slash themselves, cut themselves, and bleed, this will please the gods, the god who will then give them powers, or if they burn themselves, they will be born into this god's heaven, this goddess's heaven. So from Shantideva's perspective, these meaningless austerities of being cut and burned, he said, so look around, he says, like these people who are only looking from his perspective for to be powerful, to gain the god's favor, or to be born into the goddess's heaven, that they're able and capable of doing that, he says, and he says, and you, he's talking to his fellow bodhisattvas, he says, and you, have made the vow to not just free yourself, but to free all beings from confusion and to attain the state of Buddha. How can you be so timid? Verse 14 is saying, there's nothing. There's nothing that doesn't get easier with familiarity. So be patient, kashanti. First begin with having, tolerance for small inconveniences, then build up your ability. So now let's take a quick break, and then we will begin again in 5-7 minutes. So let's see if there are questions. I just saw in the chat, somebody asked about how to perhaps chant the Bodhicharyavatara. We will experiment. I would say try to use the same cadence, the same, style as the sevenfold puja that we used. So this is a question in English, and I am assuming that the question is how to chant in English. Try to use the same as the one that we use for in all the worlds of the 10 directions reside Tathagatas of the 3 times. You could try using that particular way of chanting. Yeah, I don't know. Jeff, did you catch the answer about the chant? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Yeah, you got it. Okay. So then there is also a question, a very good question as well, about what about patience? Is it recommended in all situations, especially those involving drugs, alcohol, persistent illness? What about abusive relationships? Yeah, it's good to ask like that, but try to remember, these are not commandments. Buddha's teachings don't operate the same way as an all-powerful God telling you can, you cannot, you should not. You have to, ask yourself, skillful or not skillful? Sometimes we say we don't know. So test it and pay attention. There's no, go full on or stop. You should not. Thou shalt not. All the teachings you have to approach with. Here is what Buddha taught. Now let me apply and see. So you have to develop the path. The 4 noble truths. Noble truth of dukkha, cause of dukkha, end of dukkha, the way to end dukkha, right? The 4 noble truths. With the 4 noble truths, each of those noble truths, there is a verb associated with it. Particularly the verb for the path is to develop the path. Develop the path doesn't mean, you go make up your own path. But develop the path does mean the path to awakening and freedom is not a preset path, like somebody built the road, you just drive on it. No. Develop the path means you have to. The path is something that actively unfolds based on decisions that you make at every point of this path. And so you have to develop the path in that sense.
Dr. Lee?
Not yet. So I cannot emphasize enough, the importance of this word skillful. Skillful or not skillful. Without skill, and skill don't drop from the sky. Skill comes from careful applying, adjusting, experimenting, and then you develop the skill. So skillful or unskillful is really crucial, right, in developing the path. If you see someone beating a child, a child, it's not skillful to practice patience. Again, I give you a story from the forest tradition, Again, so this is a story, an incident of, there is a seamstress, a famous, very well popular, high demand tailor in Bangkok. So then she started to go train in meditation, to go to northeastern Thailand from time to time to receive instructions from Longpo and to do retreats there. So after a while, in one of the interviews, meeting with Longpo asked her, how's your practice going? And she said, oh, it's going well, and this and that. And then Longpo said, so what about your business? She said, oh, business, well, it's okay. And Longpo said, so what's going on? She said, well, some of my customers, they heard or found out that I've been coming, here from time to time to learn meditation, to practice the Dharma. And some of them have started to use this against me. And she said, and Longpo said, how? She said, they are starting to say things like, you talk about, practicing the Dharma and this and that, and, but you still charge us, so expensive for your services, And she said, they don't say it directly to me. They kind of gossip around, and some of them actually say it directly to me. So she said, so it's a little, uncomfortable. So Longpo laughed and then said to her, if anyone says that to you, you tell them, you are confusing the fact that I am learning how to practice Dharma. I'm not learning how to be stupid. I'm learning the Dharma. I'm not learning how to be stupid. He said, tell them, there are lots of tailors in Bangkok. You don't like me, you go somewhere else. Yeah. So especially this chapter on patience, first thing to say, maybe I should have said this, so thank you for this question, is you're not learning how to be a doormat. You're not learning how to let people bully and abuse you. No. Okay, Peter. Now.
Sorry about that.
Your Kashanti is being rewarded now.
I was forgetting it at the beginning, but simply actually as sort of a follow-up, you've answered in some way the question, but the question I had was simply if you could say more about skillful letting go of desire, because you talked about that before.
Let go and see what happens,
Okay. Yeah, that's why I say you kind of answered that question already.
Yeah. There's not much to say, unless, if you want to play out a scenario, then we can get, more detail perhaps. And even that, my answer is just based on my understanding and my experiment. Yeah. So the difference, I would say, the general kind of the general distinction between skillful and unskillful letting go is unskillful letting go is the kind of letting go that is not really letting go. It's just, I don't want to deal with the problem. Or I don't want to take responsibility. So we have many kind of hidden agendas in this program of letting go. But sometimes we don't know that the agendas are even there, right? So when we let go, we have to let go with awareness, meaning we pay attention. What is this letting go about? There is where it becomes skillful or unskillful. And so paying attention is really important.
Thank you. Thank you.
So don't like listen again, a general kind of way of listening to these teachings and taking them in. Don't take any part of this out of context or kind of like fixate on. Always have that a bigger picture understanding, right? What essentially the Buddha is teaching. That's really important, the big view of what this is about. So yes, in fact, you're going to see in this chapter, Shantideva is going to push a certain reasoning into, I would say, into a very extreme direction. But even there, that extreme direction fulfills a particular purpose. Is it to be taken as, a commandment, not to be transgressed? I think if we have that attitude, we are approaching this completely wrong. Yeah, so one of the kind of backdrop for understanding this teaching on patience, right, is, for example, I also talked about this before. Many examples in the Buddha's own lifetime, patience doesn't translate to not acting. So when a certain village came to complain to him about these monks who are unruly, and these villagers don't like them living in that area, the Buddha did not say, "Oh, patience, patience." And the Buddha also did not say to himself, "Patience, patience." Buddha surveyed the situation and understood, and then said to his key disciples, he said, I need you to go to that village and tell those monks of ours that they're no longer welcome there. They should leave. Then this monk said, Lord, those monks have a reputation of being really tough and rough. I don't know if you all remember this story. What did the Buddha say? The Buddha says, well, you bring some tough guys with you. The Buddha lived in the real world as well as yours and mine. Buddha said, you bring some tough guys with you and make sure they leave. One kind of unskillful letting go is, you could call it premature letting go. letting go too early. And so that kind of letting go is usually about avoidance. Then we use Dharma vocabulary to kind of give it a, a holy look, apply a layer of holiness and call it, oh, I let go already. It's just avoidance. It's not letting go. So when I say, with attention, with awareness, let go, again, maybe I should define. What is attention? What is awareness? Not like attention, awareness in the, it can go in so many directions. Fundamentally, attention and awareness to recognizing, is this dukkha or not? Yes, this is dukkha. This dukkha came from somewhere. Where does it come from? It comes from frustration, comes from desire, comes from attachment, aversion. Is attachment and aversion heavy or not? Not as Buddha says it's heavy, not enough. Yes, Buddha says it's heavy. You have faith in the Buddha, you have confidence in what the Buddha say, then, but not yet, not enough. You have to feel the heaviness. So sometimes you have to carry this dukkha around a little bit. So that is skillful. Carry this dukkha around a little bit. And when you carry this dukkha around a little bit, you're carrying it with awareness. You feel the weight. You feel the weight. And then when you feel really the weight, how it's weighting you down, and how the weight is actually increasing the longer you carry it, then drop it.
No.
And when you drop it, you also have to drop it with awareness, with attention. So when you drop it, how awareness and attention works at that point, it is to see. Taste the freedom. Taste how light it is now. And fold that into your experience. So that you will remember in future, when again you're carrying around this weight, you will remember, oh, I can feel the release if I let go. Then it might inspire you in those future occasions of carrying around dukkha to say, now I need to let this go. This process is dynamic. Right? It's constantly evolving, changing. We have to remain present for all of its, dynamic nature. In other words, its impermanent nature. Its unpredictable nature. Its unsure nature. Yes, Melissa.
So you mentioned that there was a verb associated with each of the four noble truths, and the one for the fourth is develop. So I was wondering if you could tell us the other three.
Sure. First one in relation to dukkha is to recognize dukkha. Second, in relation to the cause of dukkha, is to relinquish the cause. Third, in relation to the freedom of nirvana, is to experience the freedom, to taste that freedom.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Nowhere in these four noble truths, noble truths, does the Buddha says believe. Of course, belief has a role to play in our path to awakening, but it's not as central compared to other, I think, spiritual traditions. Another important thing as an overall kind of attitude or understanding when we are learning the Dharma, putting Dharma into practice, right, is to understand or to make the distinction between there is right view. Buddha taught right view. So there's right view, which frees us. And then there are views about right views. And that's, no guarantee what they will do. Any other questions? So verse 15, don't I see that this is so with common irritations, bites and stings of snakes and flies, experiences of hunger and of thirst and painful rashes on my skin, Yeah, so these, again, just to give us some perspective, these are common irritations during the time of Shantideva. I'm thinking, what? Snake bites? Gosh, those are not common irritations for me. But for Shantideva's time, those were the common irritations. So here, sometimes we lose perspective, we think, this, that, we get a paper cut, it's like, we have become so intolerant, of, compared to Shantideva, when he talks about common irritations, bites and stings of snakes and flies, experiences of hunger and thirst. I remember one time asking a friend who grew up in communist China, he's Tibetan, and then eventually escaped. And I said to him, have you ever experienced growing up, like going to bed hungry? He said, no. I'm not using this to say, oh, things are just fine. I'm just saying that even in those difficult situations, generally our world has become such a place, where a lot of us don't face these common irritations that Shantideva talk about, But during his time, he gave these examples as, hey, those are little things. But now, what do you mean little? So see the relative nature of serious or not serious. Common or not common. "16, heat and cold, wind and rain, sickness, prison, beatings." He says, I will not fret about such things. To do so only aggravates my trouble. So here again, he's not saying, if you are able to get out of the heat or get out of the cold, if you are able to recover from the sickness, if you are able to stop being beaten, that you should not do that. You should, of course. What he's saying here is not to fret and not to let that aggravate, to make things worse, in other words. Don't let it become worse by allowing mental torture to latch on to physical suffering that is already going on. There's no question to me, with the physical suffering, if you are able to change that, Shantideva will say, change it. What he's emphasizing here is that in the wake of physical suffering, we unknowingly allow mental, emotional suffering to grow on top of that. He's saying that mental and emotional suffering can be reduced, can be reduced. So one senior Western teacher in the Vipassana tradition, he has a nice way of putting it. He says, pain multiplied by resistance equals suffering. And in this equation, he says, if you want to think of it as bad news, then you can think of it. Then yes, bad news is, as long as you are alive as a human being, you cannot avoid pain. In fact, if I would add, like our body's ability to experience pain is part of, has a function to play. It's calling attention to there's a problem there. Otherwise, you will bleed to death, or you will put your hand on top of a stove and it's burning it away and you don't even know. And so there are actually medical conditions like that, where the pain receptor has disappeared. And people would cut themselves, burn themselves, and not even feel pain. That's not a good state to be in, because then you will die very soon. So in that sense, you could say pain has a function, and that's why as long as you're alive and as a human, your pain is not going to become zero. But so pain multiplied by resistance. So I would add resistance, maybe you can even say all the mental, emotional stuff. So pain, physical pain multiplied by all the mental, emotional stuff equals suffering. So here's the good news. The good news is suffering can be reduced to zero. How? Reduce the mental, emotional stuff to zero. The afflictive emotions to zero. Then suffering is zero. 17, 18, 19, 20, Shantideva uses the vocabulary of like warfare and heroism, like warriors. So now, of course, we're talking about the spiritual warrior, so to say. So Kshanti is not a position of weakness. It's not a position of defeat. It's not a position of like, you're like, oh, I have no choice. So, I will be patient. Rather, he presents it as true bravery, true heroism. So 17, he's using kind of a reference that is referring to like warriors who engage in, external war. He says there are some whose bravery increase at the sight of their own blood. So these warriors, when they are cut, they become even more brave when they see their own blood flowing. Then he says, then there are others who lose all their strength and faint when they see other people bleeding. That would be me. I watch movies, it's like, it's getting to the bleeding side. Let's forward. I don't want to see it. And so here, using this imagery, and then he says, now, where does this come from? He says, he says, this comes from how the mind is set. Is it set in steadfastness or cowardice? So in other words, he says, in our inner battle, he's not talking about, he's not giving you advice on how to go, burn the other village out there. He's talking about how to defeat the inner enemies. He says, in the work of defeating the inner enemies, you have to be steadfast, so that you say, I will scorn, I will laugh at all the injuries and all the hardships. And 8:19 is a good verse to refer to if we want to know, is my wisdom, is my understanding of Dharma, of reality, increasing or not increasing? And so he says, when sorrows fall upon the wise, their minds are serene and undisturbed. When difficulties arise, the minds are not disturbed and remain serene. Now, we should not read this as, saying that, or another way of putting it, be careful. Don't read this so that you then pretend to be wise and pretend to be serene and undisturbed. So this is like, again, this is talking about effect, result. What is the cause? The cause is you have to develop clarity and wisdom. And if you want to know whether it is wisdom or not, if your wisdom has increased or not, then look at how your mind reacts when difficulties arise, when sorrows arise. Then that's a good kind of measure, a good gauge. For in the war against, I'm reading now the third line of 19, for in our war against afflictive emotions, there will be many hardships, just like in any battle. 20, thinking scorn of every pain and vanquishing foes such as hatred. So he's really like wanting you to become this spiritual warrior where you are, you are so brave, you're making fun of difficulties and hardships, and you say, you come, and I will slay every one of you. And this is like having your own inner Mel Gibson movies, The Scottish Highlanders. But here, in case his audience, gets carried away, Shantideva says, these are the exploits of real warriors, real macho guys, he says. These are the real exploits, which is to scorn all the hardships and the pain. But the last line, he says, the rest is slaying what is dead already. And now he's saying to his audience, the so-called warriors that you guys admire so much. And so he's talking to a bunch of monks, I'm sure there's this whole macho thing. It's like all these heroes that you hear in stories, and they don't have TV during that time, so now we do. So we have Mel Gibson, all these Highlander warriors that they're playing, the Viking warriors or whoever, he says, those people, those warriors, they're already slaying what is already dead. The real warriors are those who go after the afflictive emotions. Why are the others called already dead? Because afflictive emotions have already taken them. They're already zombies. So defeating those external enemies, those are not real people. They are zombies. Why they're zombies? Because they have been taken over by afflictive emotions. So if you want to wage war, you wage a war against the afflictive emotions. Hmm. 17 to 20, Shantideva got his fellow monks all like worked up and, yeah, right? 21, he sobers them down. 21, he says, suffering also has its worth because through sorrow, pride is driven out. So now he's balancing it out with pride. That's the other thing we also need to get rid of. Confidence, the near enemy of confidence is pride. Do you understand that? We need confidence, but confidence's near enemy is pride. The distant enemy of confidence is, lack of confidence. That's the easy one. But the near enemy is pride, meaning its near enemy. Why it can get near? Because it resembles confidence, but it's an enemy, it's pride. So in Buddhist vocabulary for psychology, there are some of these rather helpful, sophisticated expressions. So also this is applied to, for example, compassion. Its distant enemy is, of course, lack of empathy. And then its near enemy is said to be sadness. The near enemy of compassion is sadness. So here, the experience of suffering also has its worth in the form of it can help reduce our pride. Especially in the demographics of people who are attracted to Buddhism in the West in the years that I have, been here and playing direct or indirect role in giving Dharma instructions. I cannot tell you how many times I have observed how in the particular demographic that comes, people, kind of express things like seemingly like Dharma, be like, oh yes, everything is fine, perfect. Everything is one. What is the problem? And because of who I am and my background and everything, I think about, like, you have no idea, the privilege that you were born into, your skin color, your neighborhood. You have no idea. So it's so easy to talk about and to like, oh yes, everything is perfect, pure, non-duality, blah, 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 That's the kind of pride because they have not experienced suffering, because things have come so easily. And so through sorrow, through experiencing sadness. So in this case, again, just earlier I said, sadness is a near enemy of compassion. Again, here is a good example. You see, like, again, we're not operating on like, the notions of like sin. We're not operating on that, Then therefore, if you call sadness a near enemy of compassion, oh, sadness is all bad. Not necessarily, again, how you handle it. So here he says, through the experience of sadness, if you know how to be skillful in that experience, you can reduce your pride and you can empathize with others. You can get an idea what it means to be in those other people's shoes. But if our reference point is very small and narrow, meaning I, me, and mine, then our suffering also becomes very big. Yeah, because when sorrow turns up, we can only think about this very narrow and tight space called I, me, mine. Sure, when suffering comes, if your reference point is very narrow, very small, limited to I, me, and mine, then even a small amount of suffering is experienced as great suffering. To use a rather crude but normal example, if somebody, if you're in a very tight space, somebody passes gas, farts, you're going to smell it very strong. That same fart in an open space, barely noticeable. So in that way, like farting is not the problem, when the causes and conditions come together, it happens, same with suffering, when causes and conditions come together, it happens, But are if your reference point is I, me, and mine, and you cannot think beyond you, then, oh my God, it stings to high heaven. So when suffering occurs, when suffering turns up, and there's no choice, skillfully use it to reduce your pride and to develop empathy for others. And in this way, Shantideva says, evil is avoided, goodness seems delightful. Goodness has space to come in. So you're on the road driving, someone cuts you off, rudely gets in front of you, So there you have a choice, what you're going to do about it. Most of the time, you get very upset, But if you're skillful, you're like, oh, that person must have a very bad case of diarrhea, rushing to get home to go to the toilet. Then sometimes it feels like you're driving around in a town with very bad hygiene, everyone is rushing home and ahead of you because they have diarrhea. And at least there you can say, oh, thank goodness, my stomach is strong. Then goodness seems delightful. That's the translation I have here, last part, goodness seems delightful. I mean, I don't know the exact words in Sanskrit and Tibetan here, but this translation, goodness seems delightful, to me, it's a reminder to me that we could be surrounded by goodness, but because we don't know and don't recognize them, then they're not delightful. Some people see roses, smell roses, others fret over the thorns. So we have to recognize goodness. Then that recognition brings delight. Okay, so we will end here today. Then we meet again on Saturday. Changju Sem Chorim Puche Ma Ge Ba Nam Ge Gyu Chi Ge Ba Nyam Ba Me Pa Yang Gong Ne Gong Du Pel War Sho. Excellent and precious bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise. Where it has arisen, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. Okay,
Gracias.
that's
Gracias,
it
Dr.
today.
Lai. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hasta luego.
Gracias. Bye.